Wartime brings the ideal of the state out into very clear relief and reveals attitudes and tendencies that were hidden. In times of peace, the sense of the state flags in a republic that is not militarized. For war is essentially the health of the state. The ideal of the state is that within its territory, its power and influence should be universal. As the church is the medium for the spiritual salvation of man, so the state is thought of as the medium for his political salvation. Its idealism is a rich blood flowing to all the members of the body politic, and it is precisely in war that the urgency for union seems greatest and the necessity for universality seems most unquestioned. The state is the organization of the herd to act offensively or defensively against another herd similarly organized. The more terrifying the occasion for defense, the closer will become the organization and the more coercive the influence upon each member of the herd. War sends the current of purpose and activity flowing down to the lowest levels of the herd and to its remote branches. All the activities of society are linked together as fast as possible to this central purpose of making a military offensive or military defense, and the state becomes what in peace times it has vainly struggled to become, the inexorable arbiter and determinant of men's businesses and attitudes and opinions. The slack is taken up, the cross currents fade out, and the nation moves lumberingly and slowly, but with ever-accelerated speed and integration, towards the great end, towards that peacefulness of being at war, of which L.P. Jacks has spoken so unforgettably. Every individual citizen who in peace times had no living fragment of the state becomes an active amateur agent of the government in reporting spies and disloyalists, in raising government funds, or in propagating such measures as are considered necessary by officialdom. Minority opinion, which in times of peace was only irritating and could not be dealt with by law unless it was conjoined with actual crime, becomes with the outbreak of war a cause for outlawry. Criticism of the state, objections to war, lukewarm opinions concerning the necessity or the beauty of conscription are made subject to ferocious penalties far exceeding in severity those affixed to actual pragmatic crimes. Public opinion, as expressed in the newspapers and the pulpits and the schools, becomes one solid block. The triumphant orthodoxy of the state is shown at its apex, perhaps, when Christian preachers lose their pulpits for taking in more or less literal terms the Sermon on the Mount, and Christian zealots are sent to prison for 20 years for distributing tracts which argue that war is unscriptural. War is the health of the state. It automatically sets in motion throughout society those irresistible forces for uniformity, for passionate cooperation with the government in coercing into obedience the minority groups and individuals which lack the larger herd sense. The machinery of government sets and enforces the drastic penalties. The minorities are either intimidated into silence or brought slowly around by a subtle process of persuasion which may seem to them really to be converting them. Of course, the ideal of perfect loyalty, perfect uniformity, is never really attained. The classes upon whom the amateur work of coercion falls are unwearied in their zeal, but often their agitation, instead of converting, merely serves to stiffen their resistance. Minorities are rendered sullen, and some intellectual opinion bitter and satirical, but in general, the nation in wartime attains a uniformity of feeling, a hierarchy of values culminating at the undisputed apex of the state ideal, which could not possibly be produced through any other agency than war. Other values such as artistic creation, knowledge, reason, beauty, the enhancement of life, are instantly and almost unanimously sacrificed, and the significant classes who have constituted themselves the amateur agents of the state are engaged not only in sacrificing these values for themselves, but in coercing all other persons into sacrificing them. War, or at least modern war waged by a democratic republic against a powerful enemy, seems to achieve for a nation almost all that the most inflamed political idealist could desire. Citizens are no longer indifferent to their government, but each cell of the body politic is brimming with life and activity. We are at last on the way to full realization of that collective community in which each individual somehow contains the virtue of the whole. In a nation at war, every citizen identifies himself with the whole and feels immensely strengthened in that identification. The purpose and desire of the collective community live in each person who throws himself wholeheartedly into the cause of war. The impending distinction between society and the individual is almost blotted out. At war, the individual becomes almost identical with his society. He achieves a superb self-assurance, an intuition of the rightness of all his ideas and emotions, so that in the suppression of opponents or heretics, he is invincibly strong. He feels behind him all the power of the collective community. The individual as social being in war seems to have achieved almost his apotheosis.